Welcome to the Devil's Digest Week 8 game preview. Arizona State comes out of the bye to take on Stanford this Saturday in Palo Alto as they'll continue on with the rest of their 2022 Pac-12 schedule. My name's Nick Borgia. Alongside me is publisher Hode Urbino. And Hode, there's two pressing questions that a lot of people have about this matchup on Saturday. First of all, what can ASU do to avoid a post-bye week letdown? And secondly, Emory Jones will be under center for the Sun Devils on Saturday. Is that the right decision from interim head coach Sean Aguano?
Well, I know it's the second question, Nick, but let's look at the controversial question first. I can't tell you how many dozens of fans have hit me up on my message board, hit me up on my phone, hit me up on social media, really being divisive as I've seen this fan base in quite a while, who should start Emory Jones or Trent Bourguet. And what Sean Aguano said on Monday is something I actually said the week during the bye week, that no starter, no matter what position, should lose their starting position due to injury. But the other part of the equation, and maybe it's not been said enough, but I did state that, is that as long as they're performing better than the competition in practice, I think it sends a horrible message to the locker room if any player, quarterback, safety, kicker, whatever the case may be, is not performing as well as their competition in practice leading up to the game and still is retaining the starting position. I'm sure if the tables were turned, Bourguet would not want to have the starting position just because he was a starter the week before, the game before, even though he did not perform as well in practice. So to me, Sean Aguano coming out and saying that Emory Jones is going to be the starter on Saturday, I really have no problem with that whatsoever. Now, I know what offensive coordinator Glenn Thomas said. There's not going to be any quick hook, so to speak, if Emory Jones does struggle. But I think that deep down the coaching staff knows that, let's say ASU already has 3 offensive series under their belt. Emory Jones is not getting the job done, let alone Stanford now being up by 2 scores. Yes, I think you are going to see a change in quarterback. If that scenario were to happen, I don't know if you're an ASU fan, you obviously don't want that scenario to occur, but only then and there should we talk about Emory Jones being on the bench and Trent Bourguet actually being the starter. Until that happens, and again, if you're an ASU fan, you definitely don't want that to happen, I don't think there should be any controversy whatsoever about Emory Jones starting this game. Now, when you talk about the post-bye lackadaisical attitude, and I know that a lot of people might have a recency bias, if you will. In 2021, ASU loses a heartbreaker of a game in Salt Lake after they led quite commandingly in the first half. Second half, they got outscored thoroughly, lost that game. Go to the bye, and then at home against Washington State, which wasn't a juggernaut back then by any means, absolutely looked horrible out of the gates. Washington State dominated so much in the first half that even a valiant effort in the second half was not enough for a comeback. And folks are worried about that this might happen again in 2022. You and I talked about how important it was for ASU to have a win going into the bye week, just to have momentum, just to have confidence. But now some people, again, based on what happened in 2021, are thinking, well, maybe ASU is going to be drunk on their success, for lack of a better term, against Stanford and come out flat again like they did in 2021. And I think for a couple of reasons, I don't see that happening. It's no secret that Sean Aguano, without coming out and saying it, because he has, I think, way too much class to say that, he really thinks that the team culture, the team operations under Herm Edwards was not really being effective, was not really being as productive as it should be. And maybe in part that did contribute to what happened post-bye week in 2021. So I think with Sean Aguano really just doing a 180, if you will, on everything that has to do with the team culture, with how the team operates in practice and in game week, and just in every facet on the field, off the field, is really going to help ASU not to come out flat against Stanford just because it is the first game after the bye week. Now, I'm not saying this guarantees for ASU to play the best game of the season, but I think that if they do fail on Saturday, it's not going to be because of the same reason that what happened to them against Washington State last year. Also, when you talk to players, and they often do like that hostile environment on the road, us against the world. And yes, I know, we're talking about Stanford, not exactly the most hostile stadium with a hostile crowd. maybe the wine and cheese in their tailgates is kind of putting them to sleep a little. But nonetheless, look, I mean, they won at Notre Dame the week before. Okay, I know the Irish is going through one of the worst seasons in recent memory, but you know what? They have some momentum. They're feeling good about themselves, and they definitely earned it, even with a struggling 2-4 mark, just like Arizona State. It's homecoming in Palo Alto. So yeah, I mean, folks are going to come with maybe a little more pep in their step, cheering a little louder. And I think that just because ASU is going to that environment, that helps them to be focused. And again, I'm not saying it guarantees to play lights out, but in terms of not coming out flat, I think that's another element that can help the Sun Devils this weekend at Stanford.
All right, well, let's look at the matchup. Let's compare the ASU offense to the Stanford defense. You just mentioned how Stanford came away in South Bend last weekend with a victory over Notre Dame. They held Notre Dame to 14 points, which is impressive on one hand. You can say what you want about Notre Dame being a college football disappointment this season, but then on the other hand, this is a Stanford team that has really struggled to stop the rushing attack, which is something that could work well to the Sun Devils' favor.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the game plan in some ways has to be really simple, Nick. I mean, you have Xavier Valade and Daniel Ngata. I think in terms of a 1-2 punch at running back, definitely one of the better ones in the Pac-12. And now you got Emory Jones as starting a quarterback. We know what he can do with his feet if needed. So I think all those aspects together really can ensure a good success for Arizona State against Stanford, which, again, like you said, they did limit Notre Dame to 14 points, but you just look at what they did, especially in Pac-12 play prior to that. They lost 4 straight Pac-12 games. They're still seeking their first conference win. They obviously had a hell of a time stopping anybody on the ground, and I think that Arizona State definitely has more than enough tools to really inflict their will, if you will, against Stanford on the ground. Now, I also think that you have to be really careful not to, quote unquote, fall in love with the running game and really abandon the passing game altogether. Now, sure, the passing game worked very well against Washington. I'm not taking anything away from what ASU was able to do in that vein. However, let's also be realistic and acknowledge the fact that Washington may be the worst pass defense in the entire Pac-12. I don't know if statistically they actually have that dubious title, but they definitely have issues against any passing game on any given Saturday. So I'm not saying skeptical of ASU's passing game, but let's see how they do against a Stanford team who, despite a pretty poor record, especially in Pac-12 play, is very stingy in the air. They're only giving up an average of 212 yards. Now, you can say, okay, because teams are running at will at Stanford, they're giving up an average of 197 yards, then really you're not tempted to really go to the air, especially early and often. But I think one thing, Nick, that people have to not forget about the Washington win, that one of the biggest aspects, and I think it's maybe somewhat overlooked, and Sean Iguana did mention that on Monday, is how balanced the offense was. I mean, you look at the stat sheet, passing yards and rushing yards. Rush attempts, I think, were 32, passing attempts 30. You don't get more balance than that. And when you can achieve that on any given Saturday, that really enhances your chances at least to be successful offensively, let alone win the game. So I think for Arizona State, if they can establish that run game early and often, and I think they just really have to go with that game plan mindset, that can really help Arizona State now open with the passing game. I know that the Stanford secondary does have a lot of talented upperclassmen there, but if they need to commit more players to the line of scrimmage, if they're more worried about what ASU can do on the ground, then I think that can open quite a bit for Arizona State in the air. So this is really a game that I expect ASU to find some success offensively, but again, just really be smart of not to be too creative with the passing game, and really have the passing game built on the running game, and not think that just because you're coming out of a bye week that now you need to reinvent the wheel or just be for any reason unnecessarily creative.
And let's turn the table to the offense for Stanford now. As you mentioned before, they share the same 2-4 record that Arizona State has, but maybe has some more impressive offensive statistics. If you look at their passing, 266 yards passing per game, 131 yards rushing per game. So they're putting up numbers. And then on top of that, they have probably one of the most underrated signal callers in the Pac-12 in Tanner McKee.
Yeah, and I think what does make Tanner McKee different than with the quarterbacks that ASU saw so far in Pac-12 is that he's a more stationary quarterback, a quarterback that's not really going to hurt you with his feet that much. And we heard from Sean Aguano, we heard from defensive coordinator Donnie Henderson this week that ASU is going to be much more aggressive with their pass rush, just really be more aggressive, period. Maybe we're not going to see any more 5-yard cushions that the secondary is giving to the wide receivers like we've seen pretty much the entire first half of the 2022 season. But now it's time to put actions behind those words, because if ASU can really disrupt Tanner McKee, if they really can bring a lot of heat on that Stanford offensive line, which honestly really has not been all that great, and I know that the left tackle, I believe, is doubtful for this game. I think that ASU can really put itself in a great position to win this game, because I don't think Stanford can win it with their running game. They're really going to go as far as a guy like Tanner McKee is going to take them. And if ASU can really effectively disrupt that Stanford passing game, they're going to put themselves in a great situation to win the game. There's a lot of injuries on both sides of the ball that are affecting Stanford, but I think the biggest one, their leading wide receiver Michael Wilson, not only out for this week against ASU, but possibly out for the season. And I know Stanford is going to say the right things. Well, it's just done, and it's going to be next man up. But I think sometimes it's easier said than done, because when you look at the stat sheet, I don't think nobody really came close to the productivity of a guy like Wilson. So now it might be asking quite a bit for other players to step up. But the bottom line is, if ASU can really disrupt the passing rhythm of Tanner McKee, it really doesn't matter who is or is not playing wide receiver for Stanford. I think the defense can prevail. But again, it's not only enough to talk about that after the bye week you're going to be a much more aggressive team. You're going to do a much more better job with your pass rush. It really has to really come to fruition on Saturday. And if that doesn't come, I think the Arizona State defense can be in for a long afternoon. If they are successful there, I think that ASU has a great chance to come on top here.
Alrighty, Hode. Well, how about some keys for this game for Arizona State on Saturday? What do they have to do to potentially come away with the first win at the Farm since 2007?
Well, when you look at the ASU offense, as I mentioned earlier, I think this should be a successful game for them. Maybe they do more damage on the ground than they do in the air, but if they can keep things as balanced as possible, and again, just don't get too cute with your passing game just because you're able to run the ball so well. I think that the offense can be in a great position now to win this game. The question is what's going to happen with the ASU defense. The ASU defense has not given up less than 30 points since week 2. On the other hand, the Stanford offense, and like you said, it's probably a better offense than the record indicates, has not scored more than 30 points since week 2. So to me, that's going to be the biggest key, the biggest matchup in this game. I think that the Arizona State defense can finally be the aggressive unit that the coaches, the players, and heck, the fans are really wishing them to be since the beginning of the season, that they're able to do that to enough of a degree to disrupt Tanner McKee. It may not be consistent effort from stop to finish, because I think it's really hard to go from 0 to 100 in an aspect where you really have not proven yourself all that much throughout the first half of the 2022 season. But I think the defense can do enough to keep the Stanford offense at bay. And again, I think the ASU offense on the other side of the ball can really find success, especially if the running game is playing as well as I think they will. I think that ASU is not coming out flat after the bye week. I think whatever momentum they had going into the bye week does continue at the Farm on Saturday. I think ASU wins this game 30-24.
30-24. Alrighty, Hode. Thank you so much for your insight. As always, we will be there at Stanford, so keep it locked in at DevilsDigest.com for all your pregame, in-game, and post-game coverage. Also, drop a follow at Devils Digest on Twitter. But again, we'll be there, so we'll see you there. I've been Nick Borgia. That's Hode Urbino. For the rest of Devils Digest, we thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you Saturday.